Hi there, welcome back to the Community of Readers video blog. We're following the Old Testament readings for the Monkey Bar Challenge, and this week we take our second sidestep into the Book of Psalms. This is called Songs That Shape Us. I've got two young children, and learning nursery rhymes has taken me back to the songs of my childhood. Humpty Dumpty, Jack and Jill, Row, row, row the boat. They've all come flooding back. The thing is, in Britain, we have this tradition of some pretty random songs being passed down from generation to generation. One of the most amusing things about these nursery rhymes is the terrible end to which some of the characters succumb. So you've got the forever broken Humpty Dumpty. You've got this serious head injury for Jack. You've got the scared and alone Little Miss Muffet, the perpetually frustrated Incy Wincy Spider. And my sister-in-law even claims to have heard a nursery rhyme about a mummy ladybird who returns home to find all her babies have been eaten. You just can't help thinking, who would burden children with this? But we just kind of pass on the crazy torch from one generation to another, and we never really think seriously about what we're singing. Now, I'm not arguing that nursery rhymes should be banned on the basis of their explicit content, but it is a good example of how the songs we sing don't really get questioned. Another example, which is more serious, I remember a few years ago I was at a summer prom at a local very high fee paying private school, and in classic British English, especially summer prom style, there was at the end of the evening there was Land of Hope and Glory played, and everyone stands up and sings. Land of Hope and Glory is a song that England has as its anthem when it's not competing as part of Britain at the Commonwealth Games, for example. And it's one of these songs that everyone gets into and it feels great. But the content of the song is never really questioned. The fact that it's England's most famous empire building song, and yet we live in a time of post-colonial tension. It's not necessarily that everybody standing there singing with gusto believes in the words that are coming out of their mouth. It's just that we're just insufficiently assessing what we're doing. Now, in the Psalms, we have a whole library of songs from ancient Israel. Marching songs, laments, songs of personal vendetta, songs of praise. And as a window into Israel's cultural life, to ask some questions about what they're singing about tells us a great deal about Israel's life. The fact that they make it into the Old Testament is testament to how much power these songs would have wielded in their day. If they were marginal and no one really sung them, they wouldn't have made it into the Bible. So these are the highlights. These are the greatest hits. So let's take a few and have a look at them. So let's start with Psalm 51. This is a psalm credited to King David after the prophet Nathan has challenged him on his affair with Bathsheba. And in it, David is full of contrition. Now, he should be, because you'll remember back not very long ago, we've been looking at the law of Moses, and in Deuteronomy, we read that the penalty for adultery is death. So David takes on a pretty bold plea with Yahweh. And he says, verse 16 and 17, the sacrifices of God are a broken spirit. You don't delight in sacrifice, or I will bring it. Now, as an act of leadership, this idea is radically prophetic, because he's challenging the idea that's really clear in Leviticus, that sacrifices are needed, and is pushing to something that is deeper, that is more relational, between him and Israel's God. An idea that Jesus would later endorse. Let's take another psalm. Psalm 72. This is like a eulogy to the might of the king, King Solomon. It starts off pretty well. He will defend the afflicted. He'll save the children of the needy, verse 4. But there's a lot in there that really seems to start to overplay the status of the king. Because remember, we read in the law of Moses again that the king was to display himself no better than his brothers. And yet, verse 5, an exultant crowd hail him. He will endure as long as the sun. Verse 11, all kings will bow down to him and all nations will serve him. So we get this sense that by Solomon's day, the wonder of the monarchy had kind of taken over. Especially as we note that Yahweh gets barely a passing mention at the end of the psalm. Had the monarchy replaced Israel's God by a nation growing in self-confidence? Let's look at Psalm 74. Now this is one of these corporate laments. Now, if you remember our first sidestep to the Psalms in January, we looked at laments because they are covenant court cases brought against the suzerain in the covenant contract. And so the people cry out, remember us. This is your issue. We are undergoing some kind of suffering and we are bringing our case to you because we believe that according to the covenant, you should protect us, defend us, deliver us. This is what you owe us. This is part of the agreement. Of course, there's a question in there. Are the people justified? Are the blessings and curses of Deuteronomy not appropriate? I think perhaps we read a plea for mercy between the lines, which the authors are perhaps too proud to put into words. But I think we also read of a challenge to the very basis of the covenant, a challenge that the blessings and curses system has failed. And finally, Psalm 87, which is a short but visionary piece of poetry about the city of Zion. And the city of Zion is this religious and political epicenter based in Jerusalem. It's an idea that we haven't really encountered yet in Israel's literature. We don't really get it until during the exile from Babylon in the 6th century BC, which is several hundred years from where we are now in our readings around the book of Judges. But essentially it's this idea that this is a place where Yahweh rules through his Messiah and all the nations will come and bow and worship Yahweh, and Israel will be rulers over the nations. It's kind of Israel's own vision of an empire, the kingdom of God that will reign. And in this psalm, all of the enemies, even Egypt, Babylon, Philistia, Tyre, all the great enemies of Israel will acknowledge Yahweh and this city. They'll envy the person born to it, verse 4. In fact, verse 7, they'll even credit Zion as the source of their existence. But as a sign of Israel's post-exilic political woes, this poem is just so wonderfully paradoxical, because on the one hand it's this vision of hope, and yet on the other hand, is this really it? Is this what being a light to the nations meant when Yahweh made a covenant with Abraham? That it would be the capital city of an empire on a hill? Or is there not some kind of deeper, more significant meaning than that? Can Israel not do better? Reading the Psalms this library, this songbook, opens up a window onto Israel's life, and it helps us understand what was important to Israel. And we shouldn't ever underestimate the impact of music on cultural life, indeed on our lives. We need to be able to ask questions of the songs that those of us in churches sing week in, week out. What do they really say? What do they tell us about what we believe? What's really important to us? And wider than that, in our just wider cultural life, what are the stories that get shaped through the songs that we celebrate, sing and love? Through the Psalms, by questioning the Psalms, we get to open up a window on the rhythms of Israel's life. Through hearing their pulse, we get to feel the very soul of Israel herself.